Nope, you don't have
Hello
to hit
and
anything
welcome
YouTube
to
as
the
long as it's
Pussycat
streaming to
Cast.
Doc's system.
Today we have Prim Reaper, Aiden Paladin, Brian, myself, and at least temporarily, we have Allison. And I just lost everything on my screen because everything has to go wrong when I'm doing stuff.
This is a new system, guys, so just bear with us until we iron out the flaws. It's going to be a little bit of a rocky road. Some hiccups. We're going to be taking through the tour of even worse technical difficulties at Honey Badger Radio.
This is a new
Oh
system, guys.
yeah,
So
oh yeah,
just,
definitely, especially
bear
since
with
everything
us.
was last minute.
Until
So
we iron out the flaws, it's going to be a little bit of a rocky road and some hiccups.
of
You're going
course,
to be taking through the tour of even worse technical difficulties at Honey Badger Radio. Isn't that exciting? Very exciting.
See what happens when one of your members
there
gets
we go.
cancer. It ruins everything.
Not just gets cancer. One of the members gets
Which
cancer.
they're
and
gonna
YouTube
love on
decides
this one
to
because
slap
today's
you
topic
with a
is
fucking
Google's
community
first
strike
church of women
because,
worsting.
and now we know
Pussycat
most
Cast
likely why.
14. And on
Ideological
to the
differences
topic.
with
Earlier
the
this
general
week,
topics of the show.
Google employee James Damore
Yeah.
wrote a comprehensive, heavily sourced inter-office memo regarding the company's diversity initiatives. Soon after, his communication was leaked to the public. The now infamous memo, linked in the low bar of this hangout, applauded diversity efforts, but cautioned against a social justice-led affirmative action approach. Damore argued, instead, for an approach which could best be described as libertarian and meritocratic in nature. And why does this keep closing? Okay. Progressive media outlets, rather than publish the entire menu, letting the man's words speak for themselves, did everything they could to shape their readers' opinions without becoming sources of access to the original. They cherry-picked. They paraphrased badly. They omitted sources cited by the writer when criticizing the points he had gleaned from them. They characterized, demonized, and even proselytized from the Church of Women Worsting. Their readers reacted vehemently. Social media was ablaze with criticism. Based on the slant of whatever news stories Damore's critics had read, many of whom blocked or linked to news stories when asked to cite the parts of the memo that had them so riled up. The ensuing rage fest even exposed other political ugliness within Google's ranks: coworker blacklists and political manipulation of search results. For his high treason against the guardians of the dominant political narrative, Damore was subsequently labeled alt-right, doxxed, publicly shamed and flamed, blamed for every malady that feminists claim prevents women from pursuing STEM careers, and finally fired, with conservative social network Gab.ai putting forth a job offer shortly thereafter. That was not enough for progressive media outlets. Not content with a simple dox, Wired dug into Damore's history and discovered that he once made off-color jokes in an off-color skit during a class retreat, something they apparently think nobody does in a college setting. Damore has already stated that he's examining legal avenues, as his memo was the initiation of a conversation about conditions in his workplace. Employees have a legally protected right to engage in concerted activities aimed at improving their workplace without retaliation by their employer. Discussing workplace conditions falls into that category. The question a court will have to decide, should Damore sue, is whether an employer can place limits on the kinds of ideas and beliefs from which such a discussion may draw. If the decision favors Google, it may not be long before you see the use of political narratives to control employees' ability to organize at a workplace near you.
And good job getting through that, despite all of the shit that's been overturned.
It's because I used to have a roommate named Murphy. It's all my fault. Yeah.
Whew.
Well, just
That's quite and good job getting through that despite all of the shit that's being like there's a hurricane of it. Um
because there's more of a traditional
ah you're used to it.
celebration
That'll do
because
it.
like it's you
Well, just to say my piece and then vamoose.
and they obviously have
I wanted to just do a little bit of a comparison of corporate cultures because there's more of a traditional corporation that I quite like. It's Uline, and they do basically just office supplies, but they're cool. And they obviously have a corporate culture where they try to have a little bit of fun, but they're also professional. And I'm pretty sure that they establish appropriate boundaries with their staff, despite having trying to have fun at the workplace and make office supplies can be a bit boring. I know it's horrible for me to say that and it's totally wrong, but it can be true. So they try to make it fun. And when I was creating the thumbnail for this for the Google thing that we did, me and Karen did, I was looking at the Google campus and they had replaced the stairs with slides and everything looked like a safe space or a playground, or a sensory chamber that you might put somebody who's having an emotional meltdown in to calm them. I was looking at all this and I was thinking, this looks so infantilizing. I know everybody wants to have a fun workplace where they can slide down a slide instead of taking the stairs, but when your workplace is starting to consume your entire life, like Google does, when they're creating a campus where they're trying to make it so nobody ever has to leave, you don't need friends, you don't need family, you just need Google and your slip and slide and all your toys. And it's like I'm like looking at it, and infantilization is one way that you control people and make it so that they cannot establish healthy boundaries between their workplace and themselves.
Can I rebut to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I would like to say on one hand, I do agree with
You're
you.
gonna have to increase your volume a little bit because
Oh,
you're quite low.
alrighty. I've had a different setup here, so is this better?
A little closer, yeah.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
good. Well, I would just like to point out that I will agree with your point, of course, on when divide and conquer, where infantilization in the workplace does exist. I would say, though I wouldn't use that word for it. In my experience, has been more of a result of bureaucracy, where individuals are not capable of making any decisions because they have 10 other people that need to sign off on it. And so they're disabled and incapable of actually feeling empowered in their job or do anything because they don't actually have power. They do have responsibility and stress and some deadlines, but whenever someone comes to them and they have a choice to exercise their sort of not individual will, but like their own judgment over a situation and direct someone in a particular direction, they often can't do that without a bunch of other people signing off on it. And so they end up feeling demoralized and powerless because of that. On the other hand, I will offer examples of highly productive countries. Actually, Italy is one of them, where they in fact have really good economic system. They have quite a good middle class, upper class, all of that good stuff. Of course, fashion and all the high end things that enable our economy and sort of capitalistic laissez-faire economy also come from Italy. They have high-end products, they have low-end products. They got good stuff going on over there, right? Well, one of the other things they have going on in many countries in Europe that have a high standard of living and have high GDP and other, of course, parity, buying power, and a variety of other economic markers of success, they give their employees a fuck ton of time off. They have an extremely relaxed working environment. I'm not talking about having slip and slides, but having sort of this idea of, hello, welcome to Google offices. We're not like your average office. This one's on the beach. And sort of people are making fun of that. But in fact, and you would think that if you give a lot of time off and you let people take a siesta in the middle of the day and they're just going to be not workers, they're going to be lazy. They're just going to, what's making them go to work and earn? They're just going to take it and just sit back and do nothing. Well, that is a fallacy about the human spirit. Own times when people do waste their life and have escapism It is because of stresses and pressures and a lack of a place to vent, a lack of a gasket or that little, whatever the expression is for that thing that lets out some steam. She may not
Shit.
answer.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. This is really bad.
Hannah, are you back? Okay.
Okay. I don't think they heard you. I'm not exactly who they heard, but I think we're good now, so we might as well just roll on.
And theoretically,
I heard everything, so I'm pretty sure that. Yeah, I think they heard as well. It wasn't until after she was finished that they started to complain about there being an issue with the stream. Okay, so I'm going to rebut. I was not saying that. First of all, I'll say what I was saying. There's a difference between giving people an outlet and work, or giving them a relaxed work environment, and making their entire work environment appear like the inside of a cradle. The difference is that, for example, Uline has pathways, they have interesting artwork, they have maybe I'm not exactly sure, but they probably have like playground outside of the work environment that people can let off steam. But there is that demarcation. You have this place for play, you have this place for work, which is establishing a boundary. What I'm seeing at Google is that creeping sense of turning your employees into children. And that is something that I don't think that you're necessarily addressing. There's a difference between treating your employees well and turning them into children. When you turn them into children, you establish this idea that they don't have the right to maintain their own boundaries. It's not just having places where they can blow off steam. It's having no.
That in Google specifically because of also the amount of responsibility that they have. So, I'm just thinking it's a cosmetic thing instead of actually being a bigger thing.
Well, I mean, it Well, I wasn't just referring to like the decor. I'm also referring to the practices where the progressive isolation so that you don't actually have to leave the campus for anything. So all your friends are also employees of Google. You only ever see other Google employees. It's a modern fiefdom that they're creating. And I don't think that Italy is the same way. I think in Italy there is a strong demarcation between this is work, this is family. This is play. This is getting business done, and that's what I'm not seeing.
And now you're
in
really
Google.
getting to the point where if we have a compound where they basically, which is a quote unquote cult, where you have a compound that they do not go out of, everything they ever need is there. They have no access with the outside world, don't have no really reason to talk to the outside world. Then obviously we have a situation where people can potentially be abused, and it's not cool. It's just my question was coming from the perspective of how far into the minors store type of thing have we gone with Google? Because I mean, after all, Google kind of has that sort of hold on all of us. I mean, all of us use Google for everything. If you start thinking about it, between YouTube and the payment processes and the email and the GPS, and you start thinking down the line, we are all sort of part of the Google miners store, and it's a problem. We have to absolutely stop monopolies, and Google has developed a very soft, sneaky monopoly by intruding, not the right word, but by putting itself into places where we can't live without it anymore. And if you're talking about the environment where the employees work as well, being very much like a compound of a cult situation, then yeah, we got some issues to talk about for sure.
That's real quick. I do want to say that the mine store thing, it's actually, you know, the word cash money. It actually comes from a town called Cash, where it was, you know, everything in the town was bought from the miner store. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that I just got done reading Charles Murray's 2013 book on Coming Apart, was the title of it, which is about the change in the American demographics. And so I'm reminded of that a little bit, in that when Google first started this slip and slide shit, it was actually because they were dealing with a different type of employee. And I think they did see a lot of really positive outcomes from it. We were dealing in no longer just selling products, it was in selling ideas and in encouraging people to be creative and innovative. That is the exact opposite, though, of what we've seen through this memo of not thinking and not questioning. I mean, that's why all that stuff got put in the first place, was that the cubicle system was stifling of innovation. And so this is interesting.
Yeah, you need culture. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's actually okay because the timing is now much better, because with what you guys have all said, it kind of ties back into the last line of this initial write-up where you said, Google will control what you do at work, but judging by something that you also said in here, they will control based on what you do outside of work as well. Like you made a comment about this guy having made an off-color joke outside of work, as though that has any impact at all on what he's able to do at work. And I've seen stuff like this happening a lot more lately, like people trying to look up people's Facebook pages before they try and consider hiring them. This kind of thing is happening more and more, and I don't think that it's acceptable, because what it's doing is places are now demanding that you live up to a certain standard at all times of your life in order to be considered.
Not just people, Prim. No, you're absolutely right. Not
Yeah.
just the corporations, but I've been seeing this through my, sort of liberal lens of the people that I follow and the media, sort of the and sundry, the sort of the voice actors, the not necessarily the Hollywood actors, but sort of slightly below. But they're very, very progressive, of course, maybe even more so than actual like big stars, because those people know they need to keep their politics a little closer to their to their hearts so that people don't, not go watch their movies. However, there's lower sort of level of celebrity where they virtue signal really strongly. And I've been seeing this trend that especially culminated with the memo that these people, these citizens, the voters who call their senators, they're very active about that. They talk about looking askance at any corporation that would hire this guy. So they wanted to know the name of the Google employee so that they could judge any company that would hire it. So we're talking about people arbitrating moral, it's a sort of moral arbitration of who is allowed to have an income and who's not. And if that's like the least liberal thing I've ever heard of, I don't know what.
That's for sure. Like, I mean, it kind of started off as just, oh, if you have obvious photos of you drinking or doing drugs or partying, then we're not going to hire you. But now you're not even so much as allowed to have a conservative thought in your head. Even if we can make the claim that saying that, oh my goodness, men and women tend to prefer to do different things in life is conservative. I don't know when that became conservative, but I guess it is.
Yeah, I was about to be insulted. I was like, wait a minute. I do not consider myself a conservative, but a lot of my ideas are not allowed.
I know. Mhm.
Absolutely. But also informed by science in order to achieve actual progress.
Hear you?
I can hear you.
No, we can hear you.
We can hear you, but
But
the
the
stream
people,
is just
the
saying.
stream,
Yeah.
right. But okay, on the plus side, you may have to leave and come back in.
Is
On the
that
plus
recording?
side, no, they can't hear anything. So they can't hear you or me. So normally, they would be able to hear, like, let's say there was an issue with what mic is turned on. Normally, they would either hear your mic or everyone else's.
Okay, guys.
So
let's do some damage control and some let's figuring out what's going on. Can I get each of you to speak Say she sells seashells by the seashore. Each of you in turn. So let's start with Anna. Okay, but okay, we'll say another sentence then. Say a sentence, Anna.
Oh, I just stopped talking. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
just stop talking. Say
I'll
a
shut
sentence,
up.
Anna.
Anna Cherry, say something.
Anything. Have you completely
Something
just
in
say
each.
a full sentence?
Okay. Anna, say something.
Okay, Aiden, can you say something? Just a sentence.
Yeah, traps aren't gay.
Okay, she sells seashells by the seashore. Okay, Brian, you say.
Traps are indeed gay.
Okay, Hannah, you say something, please. And now we need you, Prim.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
All right.
I like Prim. She obeys. All right. Okay. Okay, guys. If you're listening to this in the YouTube, please tell us who you could hear speaking. Okay? Who could you hear speaking? Just give us the names.
They said Aiden is fine. Traps are gay. I am now unsubbed.
Okay.
Traps are indeed not gay.
No, Hannah.
They can't hear Aunt.
Okay, all right, Hannah. Okay, the outrage. Yeah, sorry, guys.
Wait. Wait. Let's see. Hannah, go ahead and say something, and then tell me if they can hear. We'll see if they can hear you. Hannah, go ahead and say something. Hannah, we can't hear you now.
All right.
This is our impromptu.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
I can hear you.
Okay, can the chat hear?
Okay.
It's actually nobody's fault, guys. This is literally our producer got cancer. YouTube completely changed the way we produce live streams. And we've been scrambling for a month to deal with all of this stuff.
And I have an aura of chaos that just destroys all electronic devices around me.
You could say that as well. So they can hear Anna.
No.
Okay, so Hannah and Anna are quiet, and Brian sometimes cuts out. All right, let's do Okay, so Doc Bray says that there is he wants to know if you're dropping frames. Hannah, can you look and see if you're dropping frames? Well, we're gonna have to wait for Doc Bray to hear that and tell us. 0% drop frames. So whatever interpretation you can make from that, Doc Bray, that would be appreciated, because it sounds like Hannah's not throwing any exceptions or errors. We're just dealing with the ghost in the machine, a ghost that does not like us. Andrew, somebody asks, would it be better for y'all to just switch over to Google Hangout for this stream just to have something? No, no, it wouldn't, because it's not Discord. Probably it's probably just a mix max between the settings on what Hannah's putting out and what's being ingested in, and we don't know what that is. We'd have to literally we have to troubleshoot basically what's going on. And Doc Bray says, I honestly think that Hannah has set too high a bit rate in OBS. Can this be fixed on the fly, Doc Bray?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm not Doc Bray though, but okay. Jesus.
And to answer Cap Strong, who asks, do we want to look at hosting on your Twitch or Discord? No, that's not the problem. The problem is the OBS. Yeah, thank you, but that's not the issue. Our Discord and our Twitch are fine. It's just the interface between OBS sending something to Twitch and Discord ingesting the audio, I guess. But we seem to be okay now. I mean, no, don't do that because that'll end it, and then we'll have to.
It says, but it can be restarted quickly.
But would we have to recreate everything, Super Nerdland?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the settings are the settings.
And it wouldn't be solving the issue of whatever settings are incorrect.
All right, let's just do one more thing. Let's just make sure that OBS is picking up the correct microphone for Hannah. Go look at your and let's make sure that Discord is using the same mic that OBS is using.
It actually, this is just, I would suggest just doing as what Brian suggested, because but mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Has to be. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think they're Super Nerdland guys are saying it's great, just no Hannah. Okay, so your sound is not going through. That's basically the issue. Well, that's why I'm asking about looking at the mics, because it seems like, we narrow it down and everyone else is audible and we can hear you, but the people watching can't hear you. So there's got to be a disconnect between your audio and what the people watching the stream are getting. So basically, when you're talking and we're like silently waiting to talk, there's no sound because you're the only one talking. So it's got to be your mic, not your mic per se, but something from your audio into the internet out there to the people watching. That's where the issue is at. It seems to be. Allow me to mansplain what the problem is. Probably is. So and it's not red or anything. Okay. And like like on the volume, you don't have your sound turned down or muted on accident, like in OBS. Okay. And they're both turned up all the way.
Super Nerdland makes a request, check the audio area of OBS and make sure the speaker icon isn't red for your mic.
Okay.
Guys, I don't know why. Okay, now I can hear myself. Thank God. It wasn't. I couldn't talk this whole time for some strange reason. I just wanted to mention to Allison or whoever the moderator is, you can actually click on the gear symbol around the voice channel itself, and you go in there and you can set the bit rate, etc. in there. So there is a layer of modification or management in Discord of this voice channel in particular. Since they mentioned bit rate as one of the issues, that's where you can find it.
Okay. And then Super Nerdland asked if you know. It shouldn't, because
Right.
we
It seems
can
like
hear
it's more of an
Hannah just
OBS
fine.
thing.
Could be a setting. That's what I'm thinking. What I could do, okay, so
OBS talking to Discord probably.
yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to waste the stream. So maybe I could do something while you guys are figuring out the audio issues, and then when if Hannah keeps dicking around on her end, when her voice comes through, then the folks in the chat will let us know, and then I can stop
Okay.
distracting them, basically.
Can I make a suggestion? Can you get
Yeah.
really pissed off at me?
No, I'm not in the mood. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction, but I do have something, an article that is related to what we're talking about from Slate that we could go through. I won't be able to display it because I'm not controlling OBS, but there's nothing to see. It's just text anyway. So how about that? Let's do that. That could be fun.
Yeah.
I want to hear, particularly. I want to hear what. I want to
Okay,
hear what.
but first, fuck
Okay.
you, Allison.
Okay. Yeah, I want
It's
to. I
not
want to
the
know
same,
what
you know,
Aiden.
you have sort of
and-
a quaver to your voice. Brian is very forceful when he gets pissed off.
It's a quiver. You're all a quiver. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and look at this article, but by Slate called. And oh, by the way, just so you guys know, this article came out in the wake of what happened at Google with the firing of that terrible, terrible, misogynistic, just 1950s backwards Mad Men, pipe smoking, old-fashioned drinking asshole that wrote that article with all of that sex realism in it and bell curves and shit. So to debunk his bullshit science, Chanda Prescott Weinstein, I can't emphasize that last bit enough, writes. I'm playing. She writes an article entitled "Stop Equating Science," and she puts it in scare quotes, with truth. Evolutionary psychology is just the most obvious example of science's flaws. So I'm going to go ahead and read the article. We'll have a few laughs while Hannah's figuring out her audio stuff. It's 2017. Okay, well, that's the end of the article. No, I'm kidding. And people are still debating whether or not women are intellectually inferior to men and whether we are entitled to a workplace that isn't toxic to people simply based on their gender and sex. The Google employee memo about the apparent harms of diversity policies in Silicon Valley is both a shocking news story for the general public and for many women and gender minorities, especially of color, even though that guy never mentioned that, working in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine, a banal sign of normalcy. At least science is helping us make progress, right? Science is sold to us as an almost wholly objective pursuit, a pure endeavor, a way of pursuing truth and only truth. As a high school senior planning to study physics and astronomy in college, I was thoroughly convinced that solving quantum gravity would trickle down to improved human relations. Of course, I was adorably naive about both the difficulty that quantum gravity presented us — we've made little progress in the 18 years since I started university — and about the relationship between science and humanity's various imperfections. My education as a scientist did little to disabuse me of this simple view of science as a great unifier, as an objective means of distilling information. When skeptical members of my family argued that physics was dangerous because of nuclear weapons, I pointed out that it wasn't science that was the problem, but rather how people used it. But nowhere is it more evident that this perspective is flawed when we consider the uses and abuses of evolutionary biology and its sibling, evolutionary psychology. By the way, if you guys want to chime in and comment, just
I'm just already.
okay, Aiden.
But no, man, people know this about me, is that I'm a social scientist and I have a real big boner for statistics. I know I want to see where she goes with this.
You want to see where she goes with this?
This is a complete nightmare, though.
Oh yeah, here comes Slate talking about evolutionary biology and its sinister sibling, evolutionary psychology. It is impossible to consider this field of science without grappling with the flaws of the institution and of the deification of science itself. Oh. For example, it was argued to me this week that the Google memo failed to constitute hostile behavior because it cited peer-reviewed articles that suggest women have different brains. Dun, dun, dun! The well-known scientist who made this comment to me is both a woman and someone who knows quite well that peer-reviewed and correct are not interchangeable terms. I heard a gasp. Somebody wanted to get in there? Okay, guys in the stream, let me know if you heard Hannah just now, because she was just talking. I'll wait for them to respond. In the meantime, if somebody else wants to say something.
Yeah, I will say something about that. She's not completely incorrect about peer review does not make it necessarily
Right.
true. The problem,
Sure.
or any, well, first of all, evolutionary psychology, excuse me, specifically evolutionary social psychology, as with any form of psychology, are not exact sciences. Generally, what you're talking about, or you're looking at small effect sizes to medium effect sizes. Even when in the best situations, they're not going to be, the best effects.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, and this is how sometimes, and I don't know this person's background, they claim to be a scientist, but I think they'd know a little better, is that in it's not just peer reviewed, it's double blind peer review in almost every case. And not all journals are created equal. This is a very complex issue. And this is why I don't like when you get little articles like Slate, I'm sure, which is happening here, that basically try to dumb down how complex scientific publication is into a soundbite.
Right. Yeah. And you have to ask yourself what the point is, because I think that's what it comes down to. These things always have a goal.
Oh, the point is she doesn't like what we find consistently and in aggregate across countless studies.
Yeah.
At some point you just have to say, men and women are different. We find it and then not just in fields like evolutionary social psychology, media psychology, all of these very low effect size fields. No, we find this in every form of science. Come on.
As I said before the stream started, I fucking love science until it doesn't confirm my biases. And if you think about it, there is an example of a peer-reviewed study called, what was it, feminist glaciology or whatever, and how climate change is a feminist issue. So yeah, definitely peer-reviewed does not always mean correct, but yeah, this is definitely oversimplifying it.
Well, let's do. Hannah, you're gonna restart? Yeah, I can hear you. Yes. Okay. Okay, so
Everybody stay calm.
Everybody chill
stay
out.
calm.
We're gonna leave OBS.
Yes.
Do
Let's
it.
take
Okay.
this rickety rocket up to the moon.
We should be
Alright,
back
hold
now.
on.
We should be back
Alright.
now.
It's loading.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Alright,
Hannah. We can hear Hannah now.
Can
So
everybody else hear me now? Can it? Yeah.
No,
So-
don't panic. Don't panic.
No, don't panic.
Don't panic. And you guys have a towel?
Yeah, grab a
Yes,
towel.
get a towel, put it underneath your head. We're going to be taking a very, very, very rickety and leaky.
Okay, it says they can
hear
hear. They can
dimensional
hear.
jump.
Okay.
They can hear you now.
Then I'm going to
All
go
right.
back and say the things that I tried to say before that nobody could hear. The first
All right, I'm
quick
gonna mute
point.
myself.
First quick point I want to make is the company store point. The thing that we were talking about regarding Google, the company store thing that I'm referring to is an historical thing, and I think we sort of covered that before. I think everybody sort of responded to it, so I don't know if everybody heard it or not. But back when the population of the United States was expanding out west, there were companies that bought large land areas, and they set up housing, and they set up retail outlets for everything that people needed. Yeah, miners' towns, as Cap Strong pointed out. And miners' towns were the ones that were the most famous for this. And people who worked for the company then you had to live in the company housing, and you had to buy from the company store. You really couldn't go anyplace. There wasn't like another community, 10-minute drive away to go get stuff, because it was during a time period where things were still being set up in that area. So you were trapped, and they kept people in debt to the company, just enough that they could never become financially independent, and they could never leave. They could never go someplace else. So they didn't have any say over their working conditions because they were dependent. And what Allison was talking about with Google making conditions at work such that employees start treating the company as a parent and as a life encompassing thing sounds an awful lot to me like setting it up so they'll owe their soul to the company store. That was the first thing. The second thing is the really significant thing to me about the response to this memo is the memo itself was an inner office memo that was posted in an effort to create a conversation with coworkers about workplace conditions, that right is legally protected for a reason. And like I said, I'm not a really big union person myself. I don't like a lot of what unions are doing today, but the right to form a union is pretty much sacred in terms of the right to work and labor movements and so on. It's vital that employees have some way or another to to obtain the same bargaining power when they're dealing with companies setting up their workplace conditions and their pay and agreements and everything. Um, if it's just an individual against a big corporation or against a conglomerate of like multiple types of the same company, or, multiple instances of the same company and stuff like that, you end up in a situation where you have very uneven levels of bargaining power between the employee and the company. And without the ability to do things like forming unions and stuff like that, you're screwed. You end up in a situation where we go right back to the conditions that existed before unions. And there were some very bad conditions. There were some, like, workplace safety didn't matter, work hours didn't matter, your pay, you didn't have much in terms of pay negotiation. People could be kept in poverty and still working long hours and so on. So it is vital to be able to do that. And if it becomes an established precedent because of this, that a company can use political censorship of the one and only type of speech that is supported by our First Amendment rights, and the only one that they haven't been extended to protect the most frequently. If they're allowed to use the dominant political narrative, essentially, as a censoring tool for employees discussing with each other their workplace conditions and making an effort to affect their workplace conditions and affect change in their workplace conditions, that pretty much screws employees everywhere. And it's not just left or right here. I mean, if Google can say that you cannot talk about workplace conditions if your conversation about workplace conditions includes statements that go against the progressive narrative, then Hobby Lobby can say that you can't talk about workplace conditions if your conversation about workplace conditions includes discussion about what kind of birth control you want to use. And this is really bad. It goes both ways. It goes all directions, and it could be very dangerous to workers everywhere. So with this guy suing, I hope he follows through on this, and I hope that he at least gets some sort of court precedent set that employers cannot use political narratives as an excuse to censor employees' workplace discussions.
And I would actually say that it's even worse at Google than Hobby Lobby, because being able to think critically about stuff and creatively is I assume the essence of Google's business model.
It should be.
And
it should be. I mean, if they want, their business to expand, yeah.
Yeah.
Aiden is waiting to talk.
Yeah, Aiden, go ahead.
Oh, no, cool. I struggle with this because I am a, quote, conservative, right-leaning person. So the way that I feel about, I'm a libertarian, whatever. If you want to, I hate labels. They never actually work very well. But so part of me thinks, I don't want to tell companies what to do. If you want to be a complete piece of shit. Now firing is a little different because then you get into a legal issue. And what we're looking at here specifically in the state of California is now a legal issue. I honestly don't think that if a bakery doesn't want to make cakes for a gay couple, that's within their right as a private institution. However, the free market would dictate that if everyone knows that you feel that way, well, they're probably not going to support your business. And you could say, I think at some point, that works for a lot of companies. I don't know if that works at Google. at this point, given the ubiquitous nature of the company. We talked about this, when we were having some of the problems a little bit, which is how Google infiltrates essentially every aspect of our lives. How many people here are using Google Chrome? How many people here are watching on YouTube? That's owned by Google. You're almost starting to enter the realm of a public service. And I think this is going to be a little bit of a revolutionary case, not just, in a number of ways, because it's going to have to define what's the difference between a public service and a private company, or what needs to be a public service. Because normally I'm like, you do what you do you. The free market hopefully would dictate that your shit gets shut down if you're a terrible business, but
Well, my thought on this is it has to do with boundaries. Like, this is something that applies to the individual as well. If my neighbor parks their car in the marked parking space that has my apartment number printed inside the parking space, I have a set of things that I can do about that. None of those things includes going over and punching my neighbor in the face. That's illegal. And the state has the right to say that I cannot go in and punch my neighbor in the face over a conflict, because they have to maintain at least a minimum amount of order in terms of people being able to live close proximity to each other. So if this, and this, there's other things like that the state deals with respect to the workplace and the individual. For instance, there are fire codes. You have to follow those fire codes. If you are selling food to the public, there are food safety codes. You have to follow those food safety codes or they can shut you down. You have to have licensing in order to sell certain products, and you have to have you have to live up to, like, the workplace safety codes include a lot of different things that people don't think about. So you've got a lot of things that are already governed, and they're governed for a reason. Then this goes back to boundaries. Your rights end where my nose begins, and so on. With respect to what employers can require of employees and what limitations employers can place on employees in and out of the workplace, the line really belongs at that legal right to discuss among themselves their workplace conditions and try to form a consensus with which to approach the employer. And there's a good reason for that legal right as well. It is the legal right to do that has supported the progress that we have made over the last century in workplace safety, to where we're not having incidents like when my uncle got his arm caught in a rubber press at the rubber processing plant where he worked, and took it all the way up to the elbow because the off switch for the press was not where the operator of the press could reach it, and he had to depend on somebody who, having seen it happen, was shocked into inaction until he threatened to kill him, and then he shut it off. So these are things that we have to be able to do. And so I'm like, employer freedom, company freedom, and individual freedom notwithstanding, there have to be boundaries. There have to be a skeleton set of, these are the standards. And there can't be exceptions to those standards. If we're going to have a standard, there can't be exceptions to those standards where if an employee has a moral objection or a political objection to an employee's right to access that standard or meet that standard or expect the company to meet that standard, that can't be an exception. Period.
Yeah, I agree. I and it's hard for me to say that, but yeah, I think particularly we need to, if there's a standard, it needs to be maintained. If we're going to have a standard, it needs to be maintained across the board.
Allison, you were going to say something.
Yeah, Allison's next.
All right. Okay, then I shall say something. I would say that I've called myself an anarchist, and I still have anarchist leanings, but I think I'm more appropriately termed a minarchist. I think that appropriate use of government is to maintain certain respect to people's freedom of speech within the workplace, and they should have those kinds of powers. And then we can also, and I also believe in the free market. I believe that we should be able to use the free market because it allows for a flexibility, of a moral flexibility that governments just don't. So between the two, I think we can ratchet our society up to better and better. I mean, not a utopia, but just better and better. And I just wanted to just point that out. And the argument that I hear a lot from, interestingly enough, extreme leftists is that corporations should be able to do whatever they want, like Google. They should be able to do whatever they want. So the way you convince somebody on the extreme left that corporations should be able to rule us all with an iron fist is simply have those corporations speak leftist, which I find really funny because I thought that was like a contradiction. Like Anna was bringing up, that's a contradiction. It's a contradiction of being a liberal to say that corporations should be able to rule us like authoritarians and turn us into slave states. And that in some ways is what I think Google is doing. If you actually look at the structure that Google is creating, they're creating a super, like almost a religious, and when I say religious, what I mean is moral, self-righteous group of people who feel like they have a moral imperative that is superior, the right to judge another group of people within the organization.
What you're saying is Google doesn't just make things. It's like it is a culture.
Yeah, it's a culture, but that culture is a religious authoritarian. It's a religious theocracy because they've created this moralizing class that's judging the people who are the most productive at the serfs. Do you see what I'm seeing? This feudalistic system emerge from Google, where they have this religious class that stands on top of the people who are doing the production, and they judge them for doing that production. The reason why you are more numerous than us is because you're discriminating against us serfs, not because you produce more. And you need to be more numerous because the other ones, they don't produce anything but moral edicts about how bad the serfs are. It's just fucking hilarious. And it's like, that's not being evil, is it, Google? Okay, anyway.
No, I think that's a really good, comparing them to serfs, though, that's absolutely an apt description of what's happening.
Prim.
I just wanted to take this in a very slightly different direction. We're at a point now where even pointing out so much that the sexes tend to have different preferences is considered a fireable offense. And I just have to wonder how far this goes. Like, outside today, there were some guys paving the road, and they were all men. So would it be sexist, or dare I say it, alt-right of me to say that, look at all of those men paving the road, it's just men paving the road? Or when we go up to the next level, more men than women pave roads. At which point does it become like sexist? Does it become a fireable offense? Do we have to get to the point where we say more men than women generally prefer to pave roads, or more men than women generally tend to prefer tech jobs? Why does this become all of a sudden a fireable offense when you could just as easily take it down a level and say, hey, look at this tech company B. There are more men than women working at this tech company. That's probably not objectionable because it's generally a fact. You can just look at the staff listing and just see that. But all of a sudden, this guy just makes a broad generalization and just takes it up that one extra level, and all of a sudden, everybody's losing their fucking minds over it.
Well, the dumb thing, it isn't really just a broad generalization, though. He did cite sources that are reputable and that can be examined. You can look at it and say, well, hey, did these people make mistakes before they came to this conclusion? Or, was this conclusion, reasonable and rational? And because you can actually look at that and analyze it, it's not just somebody coming out and saying, and the reason that people think it is somebody coming out and saying, this is the way it is, and just leaving it at that. The reason that people ended up believing that was because so many media outlets, instead of publishing links to the memo or publishing parts of the memo with the citations intact, they paraphrased it and they like exaggerated their interpretation of what he said, and they took single sentences and single paragraphs out of the entire memo and put them up by themselves as standalone statements, with a different meaning than they meant in the context of the memo. So,
Well, I mean, even just putting it in that way, then,
you know,
like, why does it all of a sudden become so objectionable like that when you could take it down a notch and all of a sudden it's just obvious knowledge?
well, the thing is, the thing that made it objectionable wasn't what he actually said. What
Yeah.
made it objectionable to most people was the way it was characterized by the media. For instance,
Yeah.
if you say, all right, back in the 80s, girls and boys performed on par, pretty much on par in math, okay? And then along came Common Core, along came politics, along came people repeating over and over and over again, girls are lagging behind boys in school, we need to help girls in school. And there was no evidence that actually showed any of it was true. In fact, my high school valedictorian, if I remember right, was a girl. And it was a competition between girls for that position
Hey, it
without
sure was
very
for
many
me.
guys, you know. And this is like a common thing because girls follow the rules and girls do their homework, except for me. And girls girls raise their hand in class and participate, and they do the things the teacher wants, and they get the grades and so on. So you had this situation where that supposedly changed, and suddenly there were drops in girls' scores and all this other stuff, and it comes out that girls are now underperforming. You can talk about that and make a whole long statement about that, and if Vox then says, well, Hannah Wallen said girls are underperforming, girls are bad at math, then all people see who only read Vox and didn't hear the stream is, well, Hannah Wallen thinks girls are bad at math. You know, and by the way, Hannah Wallen tested in the top 5% of incoming college students in the United States on SAT scores in mathematics in the 8th grade. So Hannah Wallen doesn't think girls are bad at math. But nobody would know that didn't listen to the stream if somebody did what Vox did to this memo. And that happened with numerous outlets. So it's not, I hate to call this, I hate to talk about this in terms of the way the media has characterized it, because the fact is the actual character of what he did is nothing like what the media portrayed it as being.
Yeah, and that's basically what I've heard too, and that seems to be happening so often lately.
Well, yeah, it's not just lately. They've been doing that forever. So, but we probably should get back to the article because we started it and we didn't finish it, and that's mean.
Which article?
The
Mine?
article, yes, the article that you were reading.
Okay, Slate. We're gonna get back on that. That sounds.
Speaking
good.
of mischaracterizing media outlets, they have that habit.
There's a bunch of super chats that I should probably go ahead and go through too.
Okay.
Well, give me a second here, and I'll bring them up so that the very generous donors don't feel left out. So I hope I didn't skip any on accident. French Honey Badger gives us $5. Thank you. Says unions did not help improve work conditions or wages. Europe is far more unionized than the USA, and yet the USA has progressed much faster. He would know because he's French. French Honey Badger gives us another $5 and says there's a shitload of turnover of employees in the Bay Area, which is where he's currently at, especially in Google. Employees are hardly beholden to anyone. Cap Strong gives us $5 and says incorrect unions did, but modern unions aren't unions in my opinion. I guess he's referencing something specific that you may have said. Or
yeah, I'm
did.
going to address the union thing. Modern unions are actually like their own little mafia. They are nothing like unions started out. And what changed really was they became a almost like a profiteering type system for union leadership and for the Democrat Party in the United States. And right now, today, I would say that unions exist to be an arm of the collectivist, progressive end of the Democrat Party as a controlling feature, in terms of people's ability to have jobs and stuff. But They didn't form in response to nothing. They formed in
Yep.
response to workplace environments that were atrocious. And it used to be like you didn't have unions for every type of workplace when they first started. It was really dangerous workplaces like coal mining companies and oil companies and the railroad. And, when we ended up with delivery services for retail outlets and everything, the Teamsters Union and stuff like that, they all formed because they actually had compelling workplace dangers to deal with and a compelling degree of underpayment and a compelling need for employees at different outlets of the same type of company to be able to communicate with each other about, hey, what's working at your workplace. So it was more like guilds than today's unions are. No, today's unions, it's a totally different story. They have gone to shit. There is a great deal of what to me borders on organized crime. And it really does need to be, there's a great deal of reform that needs to take place in the union system. But I wouldn't say that that it delegitimizes the ability to form unions and the ability of workers to organize. What it does is it shows how it can become corrupt, just like everything else.
Yeah. We got two more super chats. One more from French Honey Badger that says, if you want to turn Google to shit, you make it a public service. What kind of libertarian are you? Question mark, exclamation mark. French Honey Badger is an ANCAP, so he's pretty out there.
I got to address that too.
Okay.
And this is something that I don't know if things are the same way in other countries, but in the United States, every state has a Public Utilities Commission. And the Public Utilities Commission is the consumer representative between consumers and the electric company, the gas company, the water company, things like that. There are certain regulations on how the company has to interact with the consumer. And like when when they want to shut off somebody's electricity, there are stipulations regarding what they can and can't do, when they can and can't do it, under what conditions they're barred from shutting it off, even if you owe them money and things like that. And it's again to protect the public because of the uneven bargaining power you have between the individual member of the public and the utility. It's basically to keep the utility from taking your money and not providing you a service, or from price gouging you and then basically putting you in a situation where you pay them or you become homeless or whatever, and that kind of thing I could see. The phone system used to be it's not really more anymore because most people have cellular service or they have some other mobile service, and it's not governed the same way. They're not public utilities. But like Ma Bell was a public utility, and there were a lot of regulations, and there still are a lot of regulations that your landline is subjected to, or is subject to, that your mobile phone is not. And not that they don't face regulations of their own, but not as a public utility. So I could see if it becomes dependent upon to the degree that public utilities are. I could see people arguing for that. The problem I have with it is can't live without water. So it's reasonable for water to be a public utility. In areas where it gets very hot or very cold, it's dangerous to try to live without a heat source. So I can see where the things that are your heat sources become regulated as public utilities. And when your landline was the absolute main form of, you really can't communicate with other people if you don't have a phone, it makes sense for that to be a public utility. So Google would have to get to that point where you can't do normal everyday things without it for me to agree that it should become something like a public utility.
Yeah, that was sort of, sorry, because I know that was directed at me. I actually wasn't advocating that Google should become a public utility. My question was it was just an open question about whether or not it should.
Yeah.
And moreover, I agree completely, by the way, that man, this is not about like trying to control stuff, but like when we talk about something like Google, that when it becomes ubiquitous, really something like the internet, part of this is meaning that yes, you shouldn't, that there are some things that, and this is so hard for me. I struggle with this, to say that the government should, because you should not be allowed to say, you know what, I don't want to allow you to have water service or electricity because of something about your person. Oh, at that point, I think you've gone out, because when it's something that is necessary for survival on some level, and if we're talking about the modern age in terms of internet service, for example, because I think internet probably should be moved maybe into a utility, at least maybe not yet, but in the near future, because internet service, if you don't have internet access, you can't do a whole lot of things. You really can't have a job in many ways at this point if you don't have internet access.
Yeah.
And it's getting to the point where there's definitely the question is raised. I mean, it's worth a discussion at the very least.
Yeah.
And I would say the other end of it is, I would say, if these companies are receiving a government subsidy of any kind, then it becomes a question for me. Shouldn't they then be subject to the same restrictions the government is subject to? With respect to like the actual wording of the First Amendment has to do with Congress shall pass no law limiting the I can't remember the exact wording of it, but basically the freedom of political speech, the right to political critique is what is really protected there. And if that is interpreted to say that government entities cannot censor political speech, then if a company is receiving government money, and their eligibility to receive that government money, I think, should make them subject to that stipulation as well.
It's like
they don't have the right to
Calgary
censor.
Expo.
Yeah. If they get government money, do they have the right to censor political speech? Personally, I think no.
Yeah, I think that's something worth talking about. I'm more I kind of like more with Aiden on it. I think it's a difficult question to answer, partly because I think people have concerns about Google basically being more than just a monopoly because they're so ubiquitous. But I'm also of the belief that monopolies don't last. So then Google can't continue to this practice, alienate half of the population of the United States, if not more, because it's not only going to alienate conservatives with what that they're doing, but also liberals that don't like this kind of practice. I don't think it's going to help them in the long run as long as people know about it. All right, so let me go on to the super chats. Cap Strong gives us $5 and says, in the U.S., organized crime, in Europe, the Politburo and the chart lists were the first. And then French Honey Badger gives us $5 again and says, there's no appropriate setup of government. It was always turned to shit. Minarchism is a lie. Marodes. Okay, so let me go ahead and... thanks for the comments, though. I'm just fucking with you. Let me go ahead and get into the article, okay? All right. It's easy to end up in... Let me make sure that... Let me see here. Okay. I think... Okay, see where I left off. It is impossible to consider this field of science without grappling with the flaws of the institution and of the defecation of science itself. For example, it was argued to me this week that Google Memo failed to constitute hostile behavior because it cited peer-reviewed articles that suggest women have different brains. The well-known scientist who made this comment to me is both a woman and someone who knows quite well that peer-reviewed and correct are not interchangeable terms. This brings us to the question that many have grappled with this week. It's 2017, and to some extent, scientific literature still supports a patriarchal view that ranks a man's intellect above a woman's.
It's a very fucked up misunderstanding of what that means, which is that men tend to have a broader IQ. So the way that the normal curve works, and IQ is rated on a normal curve, is that women tend toward the mean more stringently and more closely than men do. So there are more stupid men, and there are also far more intelligent men. The curve is flatter, right? Whereas women's normal curve towards the mean is more extreme.
Yes,
So, yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, I think a lot of people tend to misrepresent that. They hear exactly what you just said, and you're like, well, so women are stupider than men? Is that what you're saying? I have seen interviews where that is exactly what people have said to that
Well,
argument.
what is this bell curve I keep hearing about? No, I'm kidding.
Is it spelled with an E at the end? You really quick want to address that. First of all, the problem with IQ measurements is the test is, of course, a standardized test. Standardized testing will never be 100% accurate until we invent standardized people. Since we don't have standardized people, there's always going to be a margin of error for standardized testing. So as far as challenging the notion that an intellect level might be different between men and women, there's room to talk about that. But how the hell can we talk about it if every time the concept is brought up, everybody freaks out and the discussion is shut down because women? Which goes to my next point. This idea that we live in a patriarchal system because these ideas keep getting expressed by random guys here and there or random women here and there. Once in a while, somebody points out that men and women do have different performance. Whether it indicates a different level and degree of intelligence or whether it indicates that the character of men and women causes us to handle things differently, which might be a more accurate description. We can't once again, we can't talk about this because it gets shut down. If we really lived in a patriarchy, it wouldn't be that every time one of these things is brought up, every time this is the rare instances that somebody comes out and says, well, part of the reason that this is happening is because men and women behave differently. That they get shouted down, they get beaten down, they get internet flamed, they get fired from their job, and so on. If we lived in a patriarchy, that wouldn't happen. If we lived in a patriarchy, everybody would be like, well, yeah, that's the end of the story. Well, obviously, we don't have any more to talk about. It's women's fault that women don't get, paid at the same as men or whatever, don't end up with the same as men in income as men, and we don't have anything else to talk about.
Yeah, so shut up and get back in the sandwich mind.
Yeah. And that'd be the end of it. There wouldn't be this discussion of, well, what can we do about this? There wouldn't be people saying, well, I'm not trying to be sexist, but here is a point that might affect what we need to do to address this situation, and then getting shouted down by, how dare you, everybody, we need to make sure women are getting paid the same and have the same jobs as men and blah, 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 blah. No, that sounds more like a matriarchy to me.
Well, one thing I also wanted to bring up is that oftentimes when they talk about men and women having different brains or different strengths or different intelligences, they're not specifically talking about like book smart, mathematics, science, that kind of thing. They're talking about different skills in which men and women excel at, like women being better at picking out colors, whereas men are better at, hand-eye coordination or visual puzzles, that kind of thing. But it's this person who is saying that they rank men's intellect above women's. I don't ever actually see any scientific literature suggesting exactly that. So maybe it's this person's patriarchal view that's placing men above women, because I don't actually see that happening very often in the social sciences. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's like this person who wrote this has this vision that the people who are writing about the bell curve are a bunch of like Victorian guys smoking pipes, sitting around like a table in the study saying, oh, well, they're just women after all, clearly stupid. So we're just going to go ahead and make that a note, and then they share that with their friends and they all laugh and smoke cigars and pipes and wear their little round glasses. And the woman comes in and she's like, I hear, darling, that you're looking at the intellect difference between men and women. Yes. Go on, make us some cookies and shut up. We're almost done with the paperwork, and this is going to go into academia and it will never get out after that.
Hard project.
Well, and of course the goal that they see behind this, the goal that the social justice types see behind discussing this, isn't exploring, what differences there may be between groups of people and how can we accommodate those differences and adjust to those differences so that everybody has opportunity to thrive and succeed. No, they see it as, well, we're going to use this as an excuse to smash this group or that group down and prevent them from doing things. Because if we say something is a majority thing, if the majority of women have a particular characteristic, that's the same as saying all women and there are no exceptions, and no woman can ever be treated as an exception, and nobody can actually work in a different way than other women because they have the exception, and so on. And they're not doing that. And society doesn't do that either. Society doesn't turn around and say, all women must be bad at math because somebody said some women are not as good at certain aspects of mathematics as men, and on average, women perform lower on this standardized test than men do, and so on. Like spatial relationships, women perform on average lower in terms of spatial relationships than men, which would predict that, for instance, in a Tetris tournament that had both women and men in it, a man would win, which didn't always pan out. There's been numerous times women have won Tetris games against guys. And by the way, I used to use that as a training tool for stuffing the freezer at my workplace where I served food. But yeah, it's the fact that we talk about things in general terms is another issue. We get lambasted for talking about things in general terms, as if we are talking about them in absolute terms instead of general terms. And the reply isn't to generally this happens. The reply is to this is the way it always is and there are no exceptions. You gotta stop letting them strawman you. When you see that, you have to call it out. When you see it in a news story, comment on it and call it out. When it happens to you directly, call it out. It needs to become a thing, because that's one of the ways that social justice warriors are sort of winning the public debate. They're not necessarily keeping people from talking about these things, but they're putting everybody on their back foot. They're basically setting the tone and setting the parameters of the discussion, so that everybody has to start with, I'm not trying to be sexist, but I'm not trying to be racist, but it's not racist if it is a fact to say that the general trend of a result is X. We need to look at the cause if it's a problem and see if we can fix it, and so on. It's not sexist to say the general result of among these women in this circumstance is this. If it's if these things are true, they're facts. Facts are not sexist. Facts are not racist. Analyzing facts is important, and the fact that we can't do that because they're getting called sexist or racist for doing it, using a straw man that moves the goalpost from generalization to absolute statement, actually is hindering when those results are negative results. It's hindering the discussion that needs to take place in order to analyze why those results are happening and what we can do in terms of reform or remedy for those situations.
Okay, Aiden.
Yeah, I would. My biggest issue with some of this is that. So again, I'm primarily in what I do a statistician, so it's very frustrating to me on one level when I see people who don't seem to understand, because here's the thing: mean, median, mode, those are the means of central tendency, right? Those are the central tendency. We all learn that in grade school, and yet I feel like these people just don't understand the most basic levels of statistics, or they're intentionally being obtuse. My biggest issue, though, is that with a lot of these things, we are wasting a ton of government money on trying to fix them or make things equal that maybe we can't do. And this is the thing with Google. You can't change people through government funding or through government programs. We found this over and over again. For example, when you put in these Head Start programs, I don't have the information off the top of my head, but I can easily find it. These Head Start programs to try and equalize people of different races. So, for example, and this is a very upsetting fact, people, I know that they don't like this, but IQ, whatever you want to call it, it is what we consider a measure of generalized intelligence. It does not measure all forms of intelligence. It measures generalized intelligence, which has correlations with things like job outcomes and financial outcomes. Doesn't mean someone's less intelligent because of that. But, you know, whatever. I know it makes people mad. But yes, on average, African Americans in the United States are 1 standard deviation lower than white people, who are 1 standard deviation lower than Asian people. Sorry, that's just the fact of how IQ is measured.
Watch out, you're going to get doxxed off of YouTube now.
Oh,
for
no.
Oh, I've already said it before. I've said it before. It's just, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. But the fact that I can't even say that's so upsetting, right? That,
Yeah.
Like, we found this. We can find it every time we do these studies. Every single time. Every time that they collect these data, it's consistent. And this is such a bizarre thing about it, too, that you can't see that. And one of the things that's happened is that we were wasting government money on trying to make everyone equal. We're wasting money and time by trying to make sure that we have equal representation in tech companies like Google, when, frankly speaking, women like myself, for example, so I'm in the 99.98 stupid percentile of IQ. I'm a mutant, according to how women's IQ works. And not to suck my own clit or whatever, but like, because it doesn't work out well. It makes you a weirdo.
Quite talented.
And it does make you a weirdo, though.
Yeah, it does make you a weirdo.
You weirdo! Clit? Yeah, that's pretty weird.
But even though I have, you have such a high IQ, guess what? I still went into the communication side, even though I'm very socially awkward, because I found that more interesting than going into the technical side. Maybe there's just a little bit of difference between people, and it's not a determinant. This is the most interesting thing that everyone leaves out. IQ is not a determinant. You could have an IQ of 70, and you could still come up with something brilliant, some brilliant idea, or be a fantastic person in any field. It has nothing to do with your ability to be a successful person. This is a complete misunderstanding of what IQ is. Again, it's generalized intelligence, and these differences between people, they don't mean really much of anything. Yeah. An individual is as capable, even if, it doesn't matter.
Well, here's the other thing. Like, we do all these studies on IQ and IQ and IQ, and like, that's the outcome determiner for financial success and everything. And they started the Head Start program, by the way. One of the really bad things about it, when you're poor, buying things like RID over and over again actually becomes a very burdensome cost, a very burdensome expense. So the greatest success that came out of Head Start really was that it was the best head lice distribution program ever created, because all it took was one kid showing up that had been someplace and caught that was infested and caught lice, and all the other kids would get it, and they'd never get rid of it, because they would have this situation where not only were the conditions at the Head Start program not necessarily sanitary enough to get rid of the lice at the program, but there would always be at least some kids who their parents would, due to financial circumstances, not keep up with the treatment. And so, like, that was one of the big big things that happened with Head Start. It was everybody ended up with head lice. And honestly, the success of the program as an educational program didn't live up to any of the promises that were made, because It wasn't so much that these kids were not getting help early enough. It was they never looked at the causes behind why kids in certain environments don't necessarily thrive in the public education system. And they didn't look at their home life, they didn't look at their stress level, they didn't look at whether or not they're being monitored in their, studying, their homework, their so on. They didn't look at whether the teachers in the classroom were more invested or less invested in some kids because of the kids' participation level. They didn't look at whether or not, like, there were kids, I didn't go to school with catastrophically poor kids, because I lived in a small town, and in a small town, in most small towns anyway, you don't get the extreme ends of the income spectrum. You get lower middle class and upper middle class, and a few actually poor people, and a few people that the upper middle class would consider wealthy, but really rich people would be like, no. And that's it. You don't really get, super wealthy, and you don't get people that are starving. But there are kids in the Dayton metro area that are so deprived at home that when my friend, who is a teacher, passes out treats in class, they wrap them up in paper, or they keep them in their wrappers if they're in wrappers, and they pocket them for later because it's the only thing they're going to eat when they go home. And it's environments like that. And this is what my friend told me that was the most disturbing, was some of these kids aren't like that, aren't in that situation just because of poverty. Some of those kids are in that situation because when single mom gets money, she doesn't go to the grocery and buy food. She goes to the beauty shop and gets her hair done. And she doesn't necessarily get up and fix breakfast because she was out partying the night before. You know, and so I mean, there's all kinds of circumstances kids can come from. And it's not the idea that if you just stick them in a preschool that is more intensive for a few hours a day, a few days a week, that's going to solve all of those problems. It's deeply insulting to the people that are in that situation. It doesn't look at any of the causes behind those problems. And it doesn't fix any of them because of that. And the inability to look at things like, you know, maybe in the minority groups that are measuring lower in IQ testing, maybe it's because they are disproportionately represented in single mother households and in poverty neighborhoods and inner city schools where some of the teachers are just plain burned out. I suggest people watch Up the Down Staircase for a lesson in that. So yeah, it's yet another area in which social justice does exactly the opposite of what they purport to try to do. Instead of helping these people, they're holding them back.
Because you pointed something out, I'm going to say this real quick because this is my last point on this and we can move forward. The research that I've seen on it actually shows that environmental things, so like finances and stuff, they have an effect on IQ up until about the age 10. But you know what has a long-term effect? Single parenthood. That tends to really intersect with everything else. So the single parenthood thing you mentioned, I'm glad you did, because that's
a big one.
Appears to be the big one.
Yep. Okay.
It's almost like different parenting styles from mom and dad work together to contribute to the full formation of a human development process.
Yeah. And we all know which parent is missing most of the time in these cases.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's easy to end up in an endless loop of using our prodigious scientific skills to carefully debunk the shoddy science that props up this argument. This is important and valuable work, but it's also worth considering why this loop exists at all. Science's greatest myth is that it doesn't encode bias and is always self-correcting. In fact, science has often made its living from encoding and justifying bias and refusing to do anything about the fact that the data says something is wrong. So wait a minute. That was just that paragraph. How can we know that the data is saying something wrong if we are if we're assuming there's bias, then that means the data is always wrong. This doesn't make sense.
Well, one thing that I could say about this is we don't necessarily need to assume the data is always wrong. What we need to do is not assume the data is always right.
Yeah, but this is not
a big difference there.
This is not what this person. Oh, I hear what you're saying. The thing is,
the same person.
It's the science is not a monolith. It's basically it is a methodology. It's a practice. It's a way of approaching things to try to find out what is real. And that means that, yes, you have to constantly challenge biases going in. However, just because the data doesn't show what you want it to doesn't mean that there's biases. That's what I'm getting at. See, in this case, when we're talking about the curve, which we've gone over multiple times, and Aiden has talked about it, and we've talked about it on here, and Allison and Karen, we've all talked about this stuff. This is something that is pretty much consistent all the time. The problem is that the writer of this article doesn't like what the data shows. Therefore, she is presuming that it must be biased and something must be wrong because she's coming from this viewpoint that all men and women everywhere are exactly the same. And there are no differences, and everything that does make them different is socialized or it's sexist.
That's the thing I wanted to point out. this person who is arguing that in some instances the data can be wrong or the data can be correct and the conclusions can be flawed. That's a correct statement in that it's true in terms of research, in terms of human error is a factor in terms of anything that human beings are involved in. The thing is, social justice types are only going to consider human error as a potential factor if they don't like the conclusions. The same person would be arguing that peer-reviewed research is infallible, most likely, if
Okay,
that
guys.
research backed something that she believed in.
All right, I'm just this word of whatever I am. You guys need to move through this article because I think you're halfway through. Is it, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, so get a couple more paragraphs in. Don't let anybody talk.
Okay, let me get a few paragraphs in. All right. Most saliently, in the context of the Google memo, our scientific educations almost never talk about the invention of whiteness and the invention of race in tandem with the early scientific method, which placed a high value on taxonomies, which unsurprisingly and almost certainly not coincidentally supported prevailing social views. The standard history of science that is taught to budding scientists is that during the Enlightenment, Europe went from the Dark Ages to, well, being enlightened by a more progressive mindset characterized by objective science, put in scare quotes. It is the rare scientific education that includes a simultaneous conversation about the rise of violent imperialist globalization during the same time period. Very few curricula acknowledge that some European scientific discoveries were, in fact, collations of borrowed indigenous knowledge, and far too many universally call technology progress while failing to acknowledge that it has left us in a dangerously warmed climate. Much of the science that resulted from this system, conducted primarily by white men, is what helped us teach us that women were the inferior sex. Racial taxonomies conveniently confirm that enslaving African people was a perfectly reasonable behavior since, as Thomas Jefferson put it, black people were inferior to the whites in the endowments of body and mind. Of course, this apparent inferiority never stopped Jefferson from repeatedly raping his wife's half-sister, Sally Hemings, herself a product of rape. Jefferson is remembered as a great thinker, but when one reads his writing about race, it becomes immediately evident that rather than being such much of a scientist, he was a biased white supremacist who hid behind science as a shield. All right, this is the last paragraph, I think, or we're close to the end. But
Well, do you wanna talk about this?
Well, I thought you just said we weren't going to.
No, he got through 2 paragraphs.
She wanted me to read a couple paragraphs and then stop.
Then we could comment on it.
I'm just going to point this out about the article. We aren't going to be able to address all the points of the article. There's just no way, because we don't have that long. We don't have that much time. This is, I'm recognizing this now. This is just a conglomeration of unsupported progressive talking points. This person just took various progressing. They didn't actually write this article. I would call this plagiarism. They took various progressive talking points, worded them their own way a little bit, condensed them into single individual sentences and paragraphs, mashed them all together into an article that is a hair shy of gish galloping. That's all this is.
I'll just sum it up. Essentially what she's doing is she's talking about the ways in which science was used to do bad, immoral things to women and minorities as a means to build her case, so that when she addresses Google Bro, she can use this stuff that she's built up over this period of time in this article to support her final argument.
Yeah, but if you look at all these things, these are all things that they just say all the time anyway. So all she's done is
it's not new.
She's taken that template and then just plugged this Google memo into it, this thing about science and everything into it, and so there's not really any substance to this article at all. It's just a bunch of unfounded assertions that are really political, not intellectual.
I would like to. Prescott Weinstein, your book report gets an F for plagiarism.
I'd like to throw something in there. There is a one of the links that she has when she talks about the invention of whiteness. It takes you to an Amazon page for a book called Invention of White People, written by someone named Neil Elizabeth Irvin, who is an enormous SJW Black Lives Matter racist against white people, who wrote this thing basically to slam them for 600 pages or whatever. So this is she's just getting her information from intersectional leftist feminist types, and she's using that as her source of talking points. Hence the Thomas Jefferson thing, which is the that's like SJW's favorite founding father is Thomas Jefferson. Whenever they want to essentially shit on the entire country, they pull him out because he had some slaves, and they take a giant dump on him, and they say this represents everyone.
So essentially though, she's doing that which she is accusing. The thing that she said in the article takes away from the validity of everything in the Google memo, is the basis for all of her arguments. She's doing exactly the same thing. Once again, she gets an F.
But let's go ahead and see if we can get to the Google Bro bit to see how she's going to form that argument. That way, I think you guys could all respond to that, and then we can call it a day. So he hid behind science as a shield. Yes, I'm sure. The problem is that science was just the shield he needed in the 18th century, and unfortunately, it seems that it continues to function that way today. By the way, I don't think Thomas Jefferson was a scientist, bitch. But anyway, in other words, pseudoscience has always been a core feature of post-Enlightenment scientific knowledge, and it remains that way because scientists refuse to integrate contemporary science, technology, and society studies research into university curricula. And so too many of us get out of school and end up in a world where we are suddenly forced to grapple with the reality of how science, in practice, is not as objective as we hoped. Enough of us have heard a man, sometimes the president of our college, sometimes our research advisor, express the view that women's brains just work differently and aren't suited to technical skills the way that men's are. Non-binary people don't exist. Well, thanks for clearing that up. And transgender people are denormalized in these narratives. Women of color listen to white women normalize Europe as the birthplace of scientific intelligence while telling us that our curly hair isn't professional looking. Senior men who we would hope could be mentors turn out to be our sexual harassers, and with some frequency, senior women tell us to suck it up and lean in rather than helping us. Wow, this is really hard. Last month, a study of women in astronomy and planetary science led by University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign professor Catherine Clancy found that women of color especially suffer from hostile working environments. In June, I contributed to a Nature Astronomy feature on gender discrimination in astronomy. As someone on Twitter reminded me last week when I posted a new paper on particle physics, because the authors of the paper are women, based on the results of one featured study in that Nature Astronomy issue, we can expect 10% fewer citations. Google Bro.
No, I can't go any further. I cannot go. This is their the Relaxion, a landscape without anthropics? This is her fucking high energy physics paper. The Relaxion mechanism provides a potentially elegant solution to the hierarchy problem without resorting to anthropic or other fine-tuning arguments. This mechanism introduces an axion-like field dubbed the Relaxion, whose expectation value determines the electroweak hierarchy, as well as the QCD strong CP violating omega parameter. During an inflationary period, the Higgs mass squared is selected to be, I don't know if this is...
It's the Relaxion?
The Relaxion? Okay, is this legit? This sounds like bullshit. Just give me, go on.
I don't know about any of you guys, but I know that when I'm doing research for one of my papers, the first thing that I'm looking for is not the abstract or what the paper is talking about. It's whether the article writer is a woman, because that's the most important thing.
You raise a good point there. The question is, once again, like with the IQ thing, if women receive 10% less citations, that in and of itself is not evidence of anything in particular. You need to start to look at causes. Why is that? And there's been possible solutions proposed that for some reason feminists haven't argued to put into play. like not having people's names on their work when it gets evaluated for publication, and it doesn't go on the work until it gets published, so that nobody knows what sex the person is. They only know what's in the paper. And that, I think that would make sense, and then if the problem really was sexism, it would right itself rather quickly. But feminists instead, no, they ask for tokenism instead. And that tells me that they know that the problem isn't caused by sexism, because they don't want solutions that would make it impossible to be sexist. You can't be sexist if you don't know what sex the person you're dealing with is. And the other thing, shoot, I forgot what the other thing I was going to say was. But that point right there, it like I said, it goes right back to if we can't talk about the causes of the problem, we can't solve the problem. And, and I think that's not like a goal.
Works, though.
I think it's like a goal with them. If you solve the problem, then they won't have anything. That was the other end of it. Maybe part of the problem is that there are so many women in these professions who are feminists that instead of making their career about their performance in their profession, on the topic of the profession, in the area, in the area of study that it is, and so on, turning out that specific subject matters, research, and so on, they're busy researching sexism in the profession instead. You're not doing physics if everything that you do is about sexism in the various areas that are touched on by physics. You're not being a math expert if, as you research areas governed by math expertise, all of your research is geared toward whether or not women's math papers, women's output is getting more citations than men's, or women's experiences in the workplace involve less promotion and less praise than men, and all the other things that feminists come up with. And I guess the last thing I want to say on this particular note, all of the stuff that everybody's experienced this, everybody's heard this, everybody's had this happen to them. I started school in 1978. I started school back during the second wave, the I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar wave of feminism. Never have I had, and I took college prep courses in high school, okay? I graduated in 1991. My senior year, I was taking calculus and physics. I took languages, and I suck at that. I took the honors reading courses. I was a nerd. It was just part of what I did. Never have I had a teacher, a professor, a boss. Nobody has ever told me, you're not going to be as good at this because you're a girl. Nobody has ever said that. Nobody has ever said, you just have to accept that the boys are going to outperform you in this class, in this area of your workplace, in this particular, it's never happened in my gaming group. It's never happened in any of the nerdy things, areas of nerdy things that I've gotten involved with. It's never happened at home. Nobody in my family has ever done it. I don't know who these women are hanging out with, but they sure as hell aren't hanging out with any of the people that I know. Nobody says that stuff.
They're hanging out with those stuffy Victorian men smoking cigars and pipes in that meeting room I was talking about.
Yeah, I'd like to
That's-
see
that's-
one. I wouldn't one either.
Honestly, I think what they're doing is they're strawmanning arguments about how did we get to this result, this division in the workplace. They're strawmanning those as your professor saying this is true of all women.
Okay, can I just make my comment about the summary? This looks like epicycles, because I'm not going to get too much into it. I need somebody in the audience who's more cognizant or more learned in physics, but this sounds like bullshit to me. It sounds like they're trying to prop up a failing theory, but that is a argument for another day, so I'm not going to go any further with it.
Okay.
I'm just going to throw this out to the audience. Read this paper. Tell me if it's bullshit. And how much further do we need to go?
I'm on the last paragraph.
it.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get through it. Google Bro would argue that we ought to consider the possibility that white women and racial minorities simply produce lower quality work, which is why we struggle to be recognized as competent knowledge producers. I gotta stop. Bullshit! He did not say that. That's fucking bullshit. Did you even read the paper, bitch? I read all 10 pages the other day. You cannot put words in this guy's mouth. I can't fucking stand this shit. Just because there are... Look, here's the thing about Google, okay? I just gotta put this out there. James Damore. It's got to be one or the other. Either James Damore is right and Google has tech positions that are basically 80% male dominated due to natural tendencies of sexual dimorphism, or James Damore is wrong and Google has tech positions that are 80% male because of misogynistic hiring practices. Now, it can't be the other one because Google fired the guy for even mentioning it. So it's not even possible that Google is misogynistic. But maybe they are because they think that they need to prop women up in some way and they're willing to fire dudes to do it because they think so little of them. But this guy's just bringing up some truth, and this cunt is trying to basically come up with what he's really thinking. If there's one thing that makes me mad about feminists and social justice warriors, the thing that pisses me off about them the most is they think they know what you're thinking, and they put it out there like it's fucking fact. And I can't stand that shit. All right, that's it for that sentence. Anyway.
I think you're right, except they don't care what you're thinking. They only care what arguments they can make. They will deliberately, knowingly, and willfully strawman your arguments because they can't handle the information that you're actually putting out there.
Yeah. All right, next. Okay, so I'm sorry if I blew up the microphone. For those of you guys who are wearing headphones, I got mad.
I think you should do that more often.
I could see that Aiden was chuckling. I know that she agrees with me.
I'm getting a lot of... actually, my problem is I'm getting a lot of Robo Brian. Can you pop out and back in?
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Okay, all right.
Okay, how about now? I'm back. I'm quick.
Still pretty Robo. Maybe the chat can... I'm not
it's
trying
coming,
to...
it's coming through.
Brian.
It's coming through here just fine.
Okay, they said the sound is fine here.
Yeah, it's at your end, Allison.
Right. You'll have to leave and come back in. All right, so where was I? It's time to turn the tables on this debate. Rather than leaning in and trying endlessly to prove our humanity and value, people like him should have to prove that our inferiority is the problem. What, do you feel inferior? Because you did write about relaxions. Maybe you could use that. Eliminate structural biases in education, healthcare, housing, and salaries that favor white men and see if we fail. Run the experiment. Be a scientist about it. You have freedom of opportunity. Allison, if you're trying to talk, we can't hear you. You can make... This is it.
No, we have to restructure society.
We have to restructure society around these people who are clearly equal. We just haven't made it equal enough for them for some reason.
It's not even equal. This guy was fired because he offended these women.
And what
fired?
What the everlasting fuck is she talking about?
Talking about eliminating structural biases. This guy has no access to healthcare, housing, or a salary now because he pissed you off. How much more fucking structural bias in your favor do you need, lady?
Well,
to prove our humanity. Lizard author confirmed.
You know what's going on there. What we've got is a person who supports... Okay, somebody's echoing. Okay, what we've got going on there is a person who supports... Okay, you have to mute. What we've got going on there is a person who supports a collectivist system again, and they don't really believe anything that they've said. This author doesn't believe anything that she said. I'm pretty convinced, because she's basically done nothing but parrot talking points. She doesn't believe a goddamn thing that she said about any of the structure things. She's just using this as an argument to support the idea of restructuring society as a collective. And this is something that, if you look at most, especially third wave, but even second wave feminist arguments, if you look at most of their arguments regarding women in the workplace, where The domestic violence stuff and the sexual violence stuff, that's the wedge to divide between like human beings and their civil rights and their due process rights and everything, to give the state more power to bring the hammer down on you. In this instance, this is the divide between people and their individuality. And that's the only reason that the upper echelons of feminism have produced all these arguments. They don't give a shit about women in the workplace. They don't give a shit about women's progress in terms of earning and in terms of careers and in terms of having whole new avenues open to us and everything. They don't give a rat's ass about any of that. That's not important to them. What is important to them is gaining collective control over the job market, gaining collective control over the business world, gaining collective control over the academic world, and this is the perfect tool for them to do that. They can use your prejudiced, your racist, your sexist, your classist, your prejudice against this particular religion as a battering ram to prevent people from protesting against that potential control. That's what this is all about. And so when you hear this stuff, of course it sounds ridiculous, because they're spouting gibberish. They're saying things that they know are not true. They're repeating talking points, and none of it comes out of giving a flying fuck about women. It's all about control. And it's never going to make sense to people who are individualistic.
I can't believe that this woman has the gall to say after all of this. I mean, what more can they do to this guy? What do you want to do? Should he be strung up on a branch for offending you? Kill him. Okay, would solve.
Yeah, they already they wanted to publicly humiliate him and blacklist him.
They basically want it to be. They want to essentially create a climate around this guy's statement that is so toxic that no one will talk about it ever again. And it will. So basically, it's not just ruining his career, but it's also destroying that idea that he put out there. That's why. Did you guys know? I shared this yesterday when we talked about this a little bit in the after show. The Huffington Post put out one of those little 2 or 3 minute viral videos talking about this guy, and essentially immediately trying to paint him as the darling of the alt-right because he put out this thing. And I'm not kidding. This is a real thing that's out there. And they showed that their evidence for it was video footage of him appearing on streams with Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux, neither of which are alt-right guys, but of course they're people that Huffington Post wants to paint as alt-right. So their goal is essentially to make sure that nothing this guy says could be considered valid or even like it has to be essentially way outside the Overton window is what they're doing. They want to place it as he's persona non grata. There's nothing that he could possibly have said that's worth a damn. It's not just destroying him. It's destroying the idea utterly that he has put out there. It's like, it's anti-science.
Their step one is to take a label and demonize the label. Step 2 is to take anybody that bucks their authority and put that label on them. And they don't really have to have any evidence that the label fits or that the demonization fits the label. All they have to do is make that the dominant narrative with respect to that label and make enough noise labeling people with that label after the demonization of that label has been the dominant narrative towards that label. That's like all they got to do.
Gamergate.
Or gay.
MRAs.
I wonder how
anything.
many labels we can do this to before we start realizing how full of shit this is.
Well, considering that it's been done for hundreds of years, I mean, the term witch hunt isn't exactly a new thing, is it? And you can't have a witch hunt without the term witch being demonized and then being applied in the manner I just described. That's been going on. It's been going on as long as human society has existed as a thing. As long as there's been tribes, as long as there's been families, as long as there's been in-groups and out-groups, this has been getting done. It's the primary method of keeping control of a group of people.
The only way it's ever going to end is if there's a critical mass of people who are basically inured to it and
Yeah.
don't tolerate it. It just and we manage as a collective to create a non-collective collective because I don't know, it's not really
Well,
that
it's just-
collective.
People simply have to be aware. It's just like with gynocentrism. Like people get mad when I call that an instinct, but it is to a degree an instinctive behavior. But then again, so is your startle reflex. So is fight or flight. So is eating. Everything that we do has some degree of instinct attached to it. Having something be instinctive or have a degree to which it is instinctive doesn't mean that we can't gain control over it. The key is awareness. If we are aware that as human beings we have an instinctive tendency towards, say, gynocentrism, or towards the in-group out-group behavior, towards accepting it when someone demonizes a label and then uses that label to as a thought-terminating cliche against their opposition, that gives us the ability to think twice when we start engaging in things. If somebody comes along and says, no, you're doing this, to step back and look at it and examine and say, am I doing that? And not just let it be an automatic behavior, to not be governed by those instincts. That is one of the things that separates humans from other animals. We have an increased capacity to not be governed by our instincts when we choose to be aware of them, and we choose to resist being governed by them. And so,
on that note, I would like to say that yes, we've implicated feminists as a label, and we've said that they don't care about the actual effect of the things that they promote.
Not at all.
Outside of gaining power. And I would challenge feminists, if they actually do, people who call themselves feminists, if you actually do care about minorities and women outside of using their vulnerability to gain political coin, then consider the fact that your narrative is actually hurting them. No, you don't have to agree with me, but just consider that it might not be helpful to tell, if you want a group of people to achieve, to tell them that everything is arrayed against them and they can't possibly achieve.
And actually, that starts with not knee-jerk reacting to everything that you hear. So, yeah, it's a hard thing. Hell, for that matter, consider...
I'm totally open to a feminist saying that they care genuinely about these issues. But then you have to ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? If you ever really ask yourself, you really question, am I doing the right thing? Then you genuinely can say that you care about the thing that you're trying to do. But if you never ask yourself, I don't think you do. Okay, I'm just...
All right.
I do just want to say real quick, what you're talking about is something called learned helplessness.
Yes.
Learned helplessness is basically like when you shock a dog or a rat or any kind of animal, which is what the research on it indicated originally. We have done this on humans. You can't do it in that way. It's unethical. You tell them over and over again, you can't do this. You cannot do it. If you try to, you're going to get zapped. Well, guess what happens? The animal, in this case where the animal will try to escape from a dangerous situation, they get a zap. They stop trying. They give up and they just lay down and roll over and accept their fate. You're wondering why maybe women aren't, going into these jobs? Really? Like, I'm not, because we've already pointed out, we've gone over like the reasons that there are differences. But holy shit, if you keep telling women you can't do it, you can't. Then it's learned helplessness.
Yes, absolutely. You should get spicy with this, Aiden. I know you can get mad because I've seen you do it.
Oh,
so
sure can.
Get mad.
I think we've all
you know
gotten
what?
spicy with respect to the learned helplessness thing.
Yeah.
But
I want to throw in one more thing. There is I just wanted to shine a little bit of light on this, a little bit of a silver lining. This article is, if you go to the comments section, there is a lot of rage aimed at the person who wrote this article. The top comment is at least the one at the time of this, because I have an archived version. It says, obviously any science done by anyone that's not a young black female with a degree in physics is at best bunk, but probably also evil. We also need to throw away the Constitution because some evil white man wrote that too. So people aren't thrilled with what this bitch wrote.
Good. At least the public's not buying it.
And the thing is, we're talking about the audience that normally goes to Huffington Post. Or wait, no, this isn't Huffington Post. This is Slate. Same fucking difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're not thrilled. So there is that. I think people are really getting sick of this shit. Like,
We're gonna
really
start
good.
calling him the Sluffington Mother Vice Jones Post.
Yeah, the Sluffington Mother Vice Jones Post. Oh,
Pretty
that's
much.
awesome. Okay, so Prim, do you have any last thoughts?
I guess basically you guys have mostly summed it up, but what I would say is just this person is saying that she has to be endlessly proving her humanity. Well, I think that she's the only one who thinks so, because if she actually took the time to read the manifesto, which she quite clearly has not, she would see that it's being hyped up and that her humanity was never in question, and that's just a really dumb thing to say. And
Yeah.
Well, and it's
maybe
typical
if you weren't
too.
such a yeah,
Well-
maybe if you weren't such a weak person, maybe you wouldn't feel the need to be constantly drumming up these straw man for you to tear down in order to.
Don't forget all the bitches that took that could not handle the truth bomb this guy dropped and had to take the next day off because of how strong they were as strong women. This
Yeah.
thing
Strong
was
and
so
independent.
triggering.
That
Strong
definitely-
independent women that need the day off because some
Yeah.
guy put a fucking memo out there that they didn't like.
That is
Good
definitely
job.
not
Praise
evidence
yourself.
at all that women are less capable of handling workplace stress or anything.
Yeah.
It's not evidence that women are neurotic either, right?
Oh no, no.
But
Oh.
I think we've pretty much talked this into the ground
Okay.
at this point.
Yeah.
So I think Allison, you had something before we close out.
Oh yeah, definitely. And close. Everybody's left the building now. Okay. All right. So over the last 2 months, Honey Badger Radio has been hit with a lot of devastating things. Of course, the most devastating is Brian's cancer diagnosis, testicular cancer. And then after that, the YouTube community strike, which was, to be honest, more annoying than emotionally devastating, but still pretty devastating to our process, as you may have noticed if you have stuck with us up to this point. And it's led to a situation where, of course, we have to have some way of helping Brian through his illness at the same time as we have to completely change how we live stream. And I thank you for your patience as our audience. And I noticed that a lot of you stuck around despite all of the problems. And my God, if you're not resilient and stubborn, I don't know what else would prove that. And of course, Patreon's treatment of Lauren Southern has left, well, I think this is one of the few times our Patreon has ever been in the negative in terms of growth. And I'm actually going to reach out to Jack Conte, who is the founder of Patreon, about having true diversity in his appeals process. But I don't know if he'll bother to respond to a heathen pleb like myself, who is also a deplorable, horrible person. So I'm going to have to look at potentially losing 3 years of work. And that was 3 years of hard shilling invested into creating the Patreon that we have today, and the amount that we get monthly that really, it basically keeps us going month to month. And I'm looking at starting all over again, because if Patreon doesn't actually make its appeals process transparent and invite something other than their echo chamber to comment upon it, I don't know if we can continue. And I don't even know if we can move away from Patreon at this point. Certainly not safely at this time, not without, not being able to pay people. And so I want to ask, if it's the case that you're not currently supporting us, I'd like you to think about why not, and send the answers to topic@padgerpod.com so that we can maybe address your concerns and figure out how to get the support that we need. And if your answer to that question of why you don't support us is why not, you can click the link in the top right of this video or in the low bar. I've created a subscription service separate from Patreon. It doesn't have all of the features, so you'll have to bear with it, and it's the little website that could, folks. And I could really use some love right now, and I'm sure that the whole world and HBR could also. So please direct your browsers www.feedthebadger.com and click on that monthly subscription and give us a little bit of love during these relatively hard times. We'll get through, but we could use some support. Okay.
Okay.
And this after show, we're going to be covering. What are we going to be covering, Hannah? After show with the patrons.
Oh shit! I had my mic muted there for a minute.
Wait, you
Can you
haven't
hear me?
closed it out yet, have you?
No.
No. I haven't
Okay.
closed it out yet, and I had a window minimized with today's topic, and it's of course gone.
Okay. Well, I wanted to give Aiden a chance to say any final thoughts on the article. Here, I'll play your intro music for you, Aiden.
Okay, all right. This is
Oh, it's like I'm playing Borderlands 2. No, I just find this incredibly. The entire thing I find very disturbing. All of it on every level. That article in particular was disturbing on multiple levels to me as someone interested in statistics and works in statistics. More than anything, the fact that I really hate sometimes using the term layperson because I know that it pisses people off. But sometimes I just gotta say, you're a layperson. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about.
But Relaxions.
You know,
I don't know what the fuck that is.
I'm not pissed off about the connotations of layperson, but say layman, because that's actually the old school version of the term.
Sure,
And I don't think there's.
I'll say
You're a layman.
Yeah.
Layman. I have no problem with that. And to go on, the topic of the after show is feminists don't understand arousal. For some reason, I can't get the article itself to open up quickly, but the basic premise of it was that when men get excited about giving women orgasms, it's a bad thing because that makes the orgasm all about the guy. So you're not allowed to get turned on when your female partner is coming now, because that's apparently all about you because you're turned on now.
And Capstrong says,
so you're damned if you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and now you're also damned if she does.
Capstrong gives us $20 and says, "Pony up, Pikers." Thank you, Capstrong. You know, we're not. You know, yeah. Thank you. I have nothing else to say. Thank you, and thank you for everybody who's stuck with us during this incredibly difficult stream.
Yes, and with that,
but we will get better. We will get better.
With that, good night all, and we're out.